Hey, we are so glad you joined us. You know what? Basketball, I love basketball.
Yeah.
But I was not a great basketball player.
Okay.
I had, double dribble and chipped over my feet or whatever. But I was more like a hockey, lacrosse.
Yeah.
But with the Raptors run in the playoffs, it has been so exciting, and especially here in Southern Ontario, where the place is going crazy.
You know what? I like to remind the rest of the country that the Raptors are a Canadian team. They're the only NBA team that we have. So, from east to west, we need to be rooting for these guys. They play tonight, Game 4 in Toronto. Go Raptors, go.
And Jurassic Park. I always wanted to go to Jurassic Park. But, the excitement.
Yeah.
And Kawhi Leonard, I didn't really know much about him because, again, I'm more of a hockey guy. So
Yeah.
I'm saying to my son, Matt, I said, tell me about this Kawhi Leonard. Oh, he was the MVP when he played in San Antonio. He's a great player.
He is an awesome
And we're excited about the Raptors, and we'll see what happens. Maybe, we're slowly changing to like a basketball country.
We're still in Canada.
Yeah, we're still in Canada. Still hockey, Maggie. Hey, I've got a great guest today, and it's going to be a story that I know is going to be really uplifting. Our guest was abandoned by her mother at a very young age and found herself bouncing from country to country, really struggling to belong. It is a sweet story that you will not want to miss.
And Robbie Simons gives us a unique perspective on the challenges of life, and another man who struggled to find affirmation after his parents' divorce finally found it. Here's Jason's story.
Growing up in Detroit as a young boy I faced many challenges because at 6 years old, my mother and father, they divorced. He wasn't around as much as I desired. We were in the same city, but he was absent. And because of that, I got involved in seeking these quests for affirmation. And they led me into some dangerous situations. It's not a coincidence that the majority of boys who are in gangs are fatherless. My name is Jason Wilson, and this is my story. I was aware of God. I would see my mom pray and my brother pray growing up. They both were Christians. My mother would force me to go to church every Sunday. I actually hated it. As I got a little older, I became very crafty with actually leaving church while they were in church. So she would sing, and I'll wait for her not to look at me. Then I would go out the basement door into the alley and run to the arcade. Unfortunately, I didn't have a desire to learn about God because it was church culture, but I didn't hear Christ pretty much. I didn't feel him per se. I almost died twice running from God's call on my life. I studied Egyptology, Jehovah's Witnesses. I studied Hinduism. You might as well say atheism because I didn't believe as well. And Buddhism because I trained in other martial arts. Just trying to understand, I knew there was a God, but I didn't see him. People, I saw the hypocrisy. And I allowed the hypocrisy of men to stop me from getting a relationship with the creator of men. And because of that, he knew someone just preaching to me the gospel would not draw me. One of a spiritual mother at the time had prophesied that someone was going to get in an accident in her son's car. Told him not to drive. That someone was me. That truck flipped over twice. After that, I said, okay, whatever, that's just a fluke of nature. I even asked her, and she told me, you're running from God, but he's going to get your attention. Fast forward maybe about 3 more years, I go unload a truck. High-low driver, bring pallets in. It happens every night. This time, the driver didn't chalk the brakes. So when the high-low hit the back of the truck, my high-low fell down, crashed on the concrete, and threw me off the high-low. And right before that accident, I'm on the phone with my wife, Nicole, telling her, if God was real, why am I in here working so hard? Why isn't he using my gifts to help people? Within a matter of 10 minutes, I'm on the ground, heavyweight high-low next to me, and I'm crying, and I say, Father, I will never go against you. I had a dream, and I saw a soldier with a sword say to me, he says, we need you to fight for us. And I said, never, you got the wrong person. So I'm screaming for my mother, and she's walking by the hallway, not hearing me. And this is in a dream. I wake up, I run to the door, catch her before she leaves for work. I said, Mom, I just had this dream, and I broke down crying, and she started crying. And she said, he's calling you, but you're running. And at that moment, I started listening. If I didn't follow God's will, definitely I would be either dead, definitely still drinking, divorced, and probably not there for my kids. I don't know. But because I followed him, more importantly, because he loved me enough to call me and pursue me, because I didn't want to follow at first, but I would be nothing. He is the reason for my existence. It's not God's desire that any boy grows up without their father, but at the end of the day, it's about accomplishing his will. So the pain I experienced not having a father is worth being able to impact hundreds of thousands of people who don't have their father. You know, in life, there's going to be things harder for you to do than other things. And you know, those things that may appear to be hard to do, you're going to have to do as a man, regardless. And it's going to take tears, it's going to take the blood of Yeshua, Jesus, and your sweat to break through it. The Cave of Adullam Transformational Training Academy, it came from my desire. The cave came from a desire to help not only myself, but boys and men. I have a saying, I be what I didn't see. My son asked me one day, he says, Dad, how did you become a great dad when your father wasn't? And I said, well, that's a really good question. I looked at him, I said, son, I simply gave you what I longed for. And so that's all I do. I give boys, young men, and men what I longed for. Even a man desires affirmation from another man. Hebrews 3:13 is one of my favorites. Encourage each other as long as it's called today, so that we will not be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. So I've seen discipline and admonishment fail, but I've never seen encouragement fail. So I give them what I long for even to this day. You can do it, you can make it. Yes, that was a mistake, but mistakes are great teachers. The only bad mistake is the one you didn't learn from.
Jason said so many important things there, Maggie, but what really caught me there was he might be calling you, but you're running. And he also talked about church and that being a negative, but how Jesus being perfect, that's where you wanted to end up. You know, so I had to sense there are people out watching today that maybe you're running from God, and the excuse is, well, I tried church and it didn't work. Well, the reality is, because there's imperfect people in the church, but Jesus is perfect. So I'd encourage you to stop running and begin a relationship with him today.
Yeah, and you can do that by calling our prayer lines, 1-866-273-4444, or email us at prayer@crossroads.ca. Amazing prayer partners that would love to introduce you to Jesus and get you a Bible if you want one and pray with you. Stay with us. There's so much more to come.
Thank you for calling Crossroads 24-hour prayer line. Currently, all of our prayer partners are busy. If you would like to leave a message...
Last year, people suffering from paralyzing life circumstances like loneliness, illness, depression, and death called our prayer lines over 500,000 times, looking for hope. But as hard as our prayer partners try to respond to every call, still 1 in 4 go unanswered. Why? Simply because we don't have the technology we need to keep up with the growing demand for spiritual help. But together, we can improve that. Project HopeSpring is our solution to get the technology we need to answer more calls. Our goal is to raise $100,000 over the next 2 months to make this vision a reality.
Crossroads 24-hour prayer line. How can I pray for you today?
I'm not ready to lose my best friend.
Just imagine the difference you could make in someone's life by your will to give. Support spiritual care in Canada. Donate to Project HopeSpring today. And as our special thanks for your support, we'd like to send you one of 3 inspirational art pieces for suggested minimum gift. Quantities are limited. Call 1-800-265-3100 or donate online at crossroads.ca/hopespring.
The truth is that without your help, we can't keep these phone lines open. Please call today and give to Project Hope Spring. Your financial support helps us share the love of Jesus, bring comfort and hope, and speak God's truth into lives that are broken. All this month, we're highlighting the work of our dedicated prayer partners and supporting spiritual care in Canada through Project Hope Spring. We would love you to join us. Give us a call at 1-800-265-3100 or visit crossroads.ca/hopespring.
I knew that I was missing something in my life.
Inside, I was empty.
Because I was still searching for answers.
But I didn't realize what I was missing.
God had to tear me down. He had to destroy me before he could rebuild me.
I never realized God had a greater purpose over my life.
Within a month, my life was completely different than I had known it.
And it felt like this piano came off my back.
It was a life-changing experience.
We always knew God was in control.
And he leads you the way that you need to be led.
Abandonment, abuse, and divorce led Leah Andrade to despair, and she even came to the conclusion life wasn't worth living. It was just too painful, and she thought about killing herself. Leah, thank you for being here and sharing your story with us today.
Thank you for having me.
So let's go back to your childhood. What was life like?
Life was difficult. Life wasn't ideal. My parents were separated when I was very young, and I had a younger brother that I felt responsible to, so certainly it was a struggle.
Now, your family came from Guatemala.
Yes, both my parents were born and raised in Guatemala, and then they immigrated to the United States of America.
Okay, then eventually you came to Canada, obviously.
Yes, we ended up in Canada when I was about the age of 5, from what I understand. We ended up in London, Ontario.
So your parents were struggling.
Yes.
Your mother left. Did you understand what was going on?
I understood, I think, what a 9 or 10-year-old could understand at that time. I knew that she was gone. I knew that I missed her. I knew that it had impacted my father strong enough to the point where he was depressed and crying a lot, would cry out to the Lord a lot. But I didn't quite understand the ins and outs. We weren't raised to question our parents. So we just kind of dealt with it with my brother, kind of on our own.
That must have been very difficult. I mean, you could say now, looking back, there was probably this feeling of abandonment, but as a child, you probably didn't know that. But how was it manifesting, for you as a child growing up?
As a child, I remember having particular moments where it was a huge struggle. I will give you an example. Mother's Days at school were very, very hard. I remember this one particular time where we had an assembly, and they asked for all the children to bring up their moms so they could gift them a card that we had made. That was difficult. I didn't have my mother. And I remember when it was my brother's turn to do that at this assembly, he kind of just looked around and tried to figure out who he's going to call. And he said, "Is it okay if I call my sister?" And so everybody was in tears at that point because the teachers kind of knew what was going on. So it was difficult as a child, not having your mom there.
And you also became kind of a mother to your brother, too. I mean, that's a lot of responsibility for a young girl.
Yes, I don't think it was something that I knew I had become then, but I felt a sense of responsibility. I knew what I was feeling, and I didn't want him to experience what my heart was feeling. So I knew that I had to protect him somehow. Although now that I'm older, I realize that I couldn't protect him necessarily of all the heartbreak that comes along with losing your mom. But I felt some kind of sense of responsibility to him.
So your anchor at that point, you did have a relationship with Jesus. You understood, at least I guess as much as a child could, about God. So what was that like for you?
I knew that my parents, before they separated or divorced, if you will, my father was a pastor. And so he had raised us in the church, and we were raised to love Jesus and really hold on to our faith. So when all these things happen in our lives as children, all I knew was to turn to Jesus, that he would be faithful, and that I knew that through him we could do all things, because he's the one that strengthens us. So that's what I held on to growing up.
But your church experience, and even including your dad, was very confusing. And I know as we talked before coming out and doing this interview, a lot of time when people have this kind of negative experience with church, it affects their relationship with Jesus. Somehow you were able to somewhat separate the two.
I remember my dad in many sermons, he would say, "We don't follow the pastor, we don't follow the people, we follow Jesus." And that couldn't be any more true. Growing up, I knew that I didn't follow my father. I knew that I didn't follow the pastor, whoever was at the church. I followed Jesus, and I just banked on that. And I knew that if I just remained faithful to God, that he would do so for me as well, and that he loved me enough to have us even with life itself, that we hadn't fallen apart necessarily, that he was there and this was just a phase or just a time that we were walking through.
Okay, when we come back, we're going to talk about almost being deported back to Guatemala, some abuse issues, and some of the depression, and even getting to the point where you didn't want to live anymore.
Right.
We'll be back with Leah right after this on 100 Huntley Street.
Talk about looking at the church and it necessarily, quote unquote, failing you per se. He was a pastor that was arranged to pick me up, to host me in his home until we could iron out the details, and this man ends up sexually assaulting me.
Being a prayer line partner today isn't for the faint of heart. God doesn't call everyone to pray with those in need, but he does urge all Christians to pray for them. This is why, as part of Project Hope Spring, we're looking for 1,000 compassionate believers just like you to promise to pray for our prayer ministry. Become a Crossroads Prayer Promiser today. Visit crossroads.ca/hopespring.
Did you know that we have an amazing team of over 100 volunteers and staff who are answering more than 1,200 calls a day, serving day and night? We love to encourage every single one of them. We want God's love and hope to flow through them into the lives of the people who are calling. If you believe in prayer, will you commit to praying for our prayer partners? Our callers need someone to turn to in their moment of need who will seek hope for God's truth. Call 1-800-265-3100 or visit crossroads.ca/hopespring.
Anger can lead to a hardened heart, but forgiveness can lead to freedom. The Bible encourages us not to let anger get the best of us, but let us overcome anger through forgiveness. If anger's got a hold of your heart, call our 24/7 prayer lines at 1-866-273-4444 or visit crossroads.ca/247prayer. Anytime, anywhere, we're here for you.
Leah Andrade is my guest, talking about what a life that you lived. Yeah.
Yes, it's been.
You're in Guatemala, United States, Canada, and now you go to Little Rock, Arkansas. How did you end up down there?
Little Rock, Arkansas. So my father, in the midst of trying to figure out his own life, met a woman and decided to move us to Little Rock, Arkansas to start a fresh new life. And so at the age of 15, my dad took us and we were relocated in Little Rock, Arkansas, complete culture shock.
I bet, yeah. We think of the Clintons being from down there, of course. So you go on a vacation, though, to your native land, Guatemala, and then you come back to the United States. And tell me what happens.
So my grandmother, upon graduation, decided that she would gift me a gift back home to Guatemala. And upon returning way back in, we did a layover in Houston, Texas, where I was advised that my student visa was no longer valid and I shouldn't be living in the United States. So I was informed at that moment that I would be deported back to Guatemala. But God was so good that one of the custom agents realized that my passport was actually a Canadian passport and offered, and I really believe it was divine intervention, offered that I could withdraw voluntarily so I would have the opportunity to return to the country and I would be withdrawn to Canada.
Now, how old were you at that point?
15.
15 years old.
Yes.
And in Little Rock, you met a guy named Robert Holt.
Robert Holt.
Tell me, because this is a very significant person, which I think prepared you for some of the challenges that you would face.
Yes, Robert Holt is the founder of Love, Let Our Violence End. It is a program that mentored young people in our high school, mentoring them not to follow gangs and not to do drugs. And so he's a minister that was called to do this. And so I joined this club per se, and he was just pouring into young people in our school. And I remember just being able to be part of that club and him mentoring us and praying for us and always being really a second dad to us growing up.
Now, you had a very traumatic thing happen because you come back to Canada. Your dad arranges for somebody to pick you up, a minister.
Yes.
And you are sexually abused.
Yes, and so that was a difficult time. Talk about looking at the church and it necessarily, quote unquote, failing you per se. He was a pastor that was arranged to pick me up, to host me in his home until we could iron out the details, and this man ends up sexually assaulting me.
And what did that do to you?
It was heartbreaking. It was heartbreaking because all I kept saying is why I seek you, Lord, why I pray to you, I'm faithful, Lord, why would you allow these things to happen? And through this quote unquote minister. But what I've learned as I've gotten older and have experienced more life, it isn't the whys that are important. It is the because. And so I've seen God's mighty hand even through that time.
But it did cause some brokenness in you.
Yes.
You were married, pregnant, and things don't go very well.
Yes. So my first marriage falls apart. A lot of things happened that really hurt my heart. I had a newborn. I was walking in postpartum depression. And I thought, you know what? I've been through so much. No one cares. I don't have my mother. My father, who knows what he's doing with his life. And, you know, this world would be better off without me. My daughter would be taken care of. Her grandma would take care of her. And I just thought, you know, I think I'm ready to meet Jesus. I'm ready to go home. So
how did you try to take your life?
So because of the postpartum and all the complications I had with delivery, I had been prescribed these Tylenol 3. And I just thought, if I take the whole bottle, I will just lay here next to my daughter and pass away what I thought was peacefully. And so I remember the one night I had nursed her, and ironically, I said goodbye to her. I prayed over her, actually, and I took the bottle, I opened it up, and I look at them, and I thought, okay, I'm going to grab myself some water. I did that, and I'm going to take a handful of these pills and take them. My newborn baby lets out this scream that scared me so much that I dropped the pills, and it was something that snapped, and I cried out to Jesus, and I just asked for forgiveness. I just asked for strength. It wasn't the time. God, I really, truly believe, used my daughter to save my life.
And then what was the immediate reaction that you had, and how, because I mean, you're at the point of wanting to kill yourself. Mm-hmm. Now you're not. I mean, obviously there still would have been some challenges you were facing.
Definitely. It wasn't a fairy tale, or it wasn't some kind of magic where you're, you know, all magically ready to go and live life. But I knew that God had called me to something greater. And you know what it is? It's surrender. When you can call out to Jesus and say, you know what, I'm at my lowest point. And that's what that night did to me. I was at my lowest point, and it called me back to Jesus, the one that I had walked away from. When I tried to do things my own way, I knew that it was time to return to him. And so, yes, it was months and weeks of a lot of prayer, a lot of getting closer to God, but he walked me through that.
And you are now married to an incredible man, Alan.
Yes.
And you have more children.
I do. So one of the hardest things for me when my first marriage fell apart was that my daughter wasn't going to have that family that I so desired for her to have, the one that I didn't have growing up. And I remember just being so heartbroken over that. But God would have it in his plans that I would meet Alan, and we have 2 more children and a dog.
Okay.
And we have this beautiful family together, and she's being able to be raised not only by our family, but her father has also seen God's grace and love through our own family, that he's also a big part of her life.
And that's what you want to tell people too, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. Yes, God is faithful, and I can't stress that enough. And just when we think that maybe we can't do it anymore, or this is it, God is there, and we just have to turn to him, and we have to place our lives and our trust and our faith that we can do it through him.
Well, thank you, Leah, for coming and sharing your story and being vulnerable too.
Thank you.
You know, and if you're watching the program today and maybe you're feeling suicidal like Leah was, please know there are people that do care. When you get to that point of desperation and you feel like nobody cares, the world would be better without you, well, that's not true. You know, meeting Leah and then Alan and their children, and you see this wonderful life, and as they are bringing that message to hope to others, please know your life matters. And if you're feeling that way, give us a call, 1-866-273-4444. We have people on the other side of the prayer line that would love to pray with you, love to encourage you, and tell you how much God loves you. We'll be right back.
Hey, we're Newsboys United, and we want to invite you to take in our interview with Cheryl Weber on 100 Huntley Street.
You said Weber. I like that. Weber.
Here we go, 100 Huntley Street, opening up God's Word to see our lives transformed as our minds are renewed by the greatest truth in the greatest book ever written. When God writes a book, we should read it. This week, our theme is Don't Waste Your Suffering. Again, I didn't make a mistake when I said that. That's what we're seeking to do. That's what the Bible, that's what Jesus, that's what the New Testament authors say over and over and over again. One of God's greatest tools in our lives is forms of suffering or trial or hardship that He allows sovereignly and providentially in our lives to cause us to depend less on ourselves and more on Him. Think of all the great men and women ever used in the Bible or throughout history of the church. Every single one was subjected in some form or another to difficulty in life, that they might find out that their sufficiency and satisfaction is in God alone. You and I are no different. God loves us too much to let our lives just be one easy street of selfishness. God loves us enough to allow us to see that we need Him, and that's where all joy and peace and love is ultimately found. So here's where we're going again this week. The number one point I want us to show you is this. Don't waste your suffering. We're learning this from 1 Peter chapter 5, is this. Believe in the power of becoming less. God allows suffering to remind us it's not about us. God allows trials or discipline upon our lives to remind us that Jesus Christ might increase and we might decrease. John the Baptist said that in John chapter 3. So here's what we learn again, which is so powerful. A mentor friend of mine said to me years back, he says this, he says, how does God bless a person without ruining them? Meaning, if God just pours out all these blessings and blessings and blessings, it comes to the point we become so elated with ourselves, we stop needing God. So how does God bless a person without ruining them? Trial, suffering, difficulty, that we are humbled in the process and then exalting God. 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 5 and 6. Listen to this. Clothe yourselves, all of you, with humility toward one another. Why? For God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Here's a theological, profound insight. You ready? So deep, so good. Pride is dumb. Pride is so dumb. See what happens here? Why is pride dumb? Because God opposes it. You don't want to be a person God opposes, do you? Well, pride is the person that God is going to pass over, but the humble are the ones who receive the grace of God. Then we see here in verse 6, humble yourselves, therefore, based on that truth, humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so at the proper time He may exalt you. Put on the clothing of humility, and then actively take upon yourself to humble yourself under God's mighty hand. I love 1 Peter 5, verse 6, because watch this, ready? The sweet spot of life, the entire sweet spot of life is that we are to humble ourselves under the mighty hand of God. We're under His mighty hand, so at the proper time, He may exalt you. So life is lived right in the sweet spot, under the mighty hand of God. At the proper time, God exalts us. So we're going through life like this. When we get out from above, that's when things get really tough. We come from up underneath, that's when things can get really discouraging. But you're operating under the mighty hand, and His hand exalts you, and that's where all of life is lived right there. I've always appreciated that insight so much. God allows us to go through suffering, which is the greater context of our passage, that we might see ourselves grow in humility, that we might see ourselves love Jesus Christ more, that ultimately He does the exalting and we do the praising. Some of you right now are being spoken to. The prayer lines are for you. 1-866-273-4444. Do not hesitate. Humble yourself and see God exalt you in His timing for His glory.
Oh, thank you so much, Robbie. And the prayer lines are for you. You know, one thread that we've seen throughout today is disappointment. Disappointment by people who unfortunately make up the church. And I know many of us have been disappointed with people who are outside of the church. But we apologize for that. We apologize for the hurt that you might have experienced in the church. And don't let that stop you from delving more deeper into a relationship with Jesus. Call our prayer lines, 1-866-273-4444. Amazing people that would love to introduce you to the true Jesus today. Thanks for watching.
See you next time.
Bye.
Thank you for your ongoing support of Crossroads, a member of the Canadian Council of Christian Charities. You can write to Crossroads, P.O. Box 5100, Burlington, Ontario, L7R 4M2.
Cheryl Weber's wardrobe provided by Melanie Lynn.
Deeks Insurance is a proud sponsor of the 100 Huntley Street studio.